We'll start with in Hebrews 11, in verse 31. It says, "By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace." From there, we will hop back over to Joshua chapter 2. And, today the lesson is going to be on Rahab. Initially, it was going to be on primarily the faith of Rahab, but the more I got looking into it, there was more in her life than just the aspects of her faith. The first verse of Joshua chapter 2 is, "And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go, view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there." The first point is one, Jericho wasn't a small city, and Rahab's house wasn't the only place there. But the spies went to her house. That's the principle of those that seek God will find him, or he will be found. Go through a couple verses there, but like Deuteronomy 4:29, "But if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul." Also in Chronicles, where he's talking to Solomon, he said, "And thou, Solomon my son, know thou God of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searcheth all the hearts, and understandeth all the imaginations of the thoughts. If thou seek him, he will be found of thee. If thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever." If a person is seeking God, God will be found of him. It doesn't matter if it is a person in the deepest, darkest jungles of Africa, as we like to say. If they look up at the stars at night, or they look around and they say, "There is something bigger than me here. There is something here that did this." They may not know all the particulars, but if they are starting to seek God, God will send somebody to them. And that's the benefit of God's omniscience. He knows when a person is going to be seeking him, and he will start preparing somebody to go to that person. It may take several years for the two paths to meet, but God will, if the person continues to seek God, God will provide and prepare somebody to meet them. Also, the reverse is true also. If somebody forsakes God, he will forsake them. One of the things Dirk also likes to mention in the jails about Proverbs 3:34 says, "Surely he scorneth the scorners, but he giveth grace to the lowly." If you're asking for something, be careful, because God may give it to you. If you're asking for God to leave you alone, God will answer that. Or if you're seeking God, God will answer that. The next verse on there is, we go down to Joshua 2:9, where actually, let's go over to the 2:9. I'm going to jump around a little bit in the chapter, but Rahab is talking to the spies, and she said, this is after the soldiers have come and looked for them, and she has hid them and she sent the soldiers away. And she talks to the spies and said unto them, "I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you." This is Rahab's faith in God's power to conquer the land of Canaan. Canaan itself was not a peaceful country. The original, back 40 years earlier, when the original spies went and spied throughout the land, the thing is that none of them lied about what they saw. As they said in Numbers 13:32, it says, it is part of the verse says, it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. It's constant strife, constant warfare. And also, a little bit further in the chapter, Numbers 13:28 says, nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land. The cities are walled and very great, and moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. Now, when we do something constantly, or actually, when our survival depends on something, we kind of get good at it. Otherwise, you're not going to survive long. So these cities and such like that, these nations that are there, they've been fighting all the time. So they kind of get good at it. Their tactics, their trainings, their strategies, their equipment. If you've got substandard equipment, you're just going to lose somebody that's got the better stuff. They also mentioned about the walled cities. You see some of these city walls. I'm sure, Don, when you were over in Israel, that you've seen some of those walls, even like just some of the walls in Jerusalem. Some of these things were huge, and they were thick, and they were expensive to make. This isn't something you just, whip up overnight or even a couple days. This is, like a multi-year project to build these things. But, all the expense was worth it because of the constant warfare. And then this is next part, Numbers, go back to Numbers 13:3. It says, and they saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which were the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, as we were in their sight. If you can assume, the children of Israel, they were, between 5, 6, and 6 foot. When you see people that are, a whole city, race basically, of people that are 7, 8 feet tall, that's just gigantic. You see some of the basketball players, the big ones, and they all look, to us, they look out on the court, they all look pretty normal. But if they actually get next to an average sized person, you realize how much bigger they are. So this this goes to show you, just what, and Rahab knew all of this, and knew that this was Canaan, and this is what Israel was, knew that God was going to deliver this land and deliver the land to Israel. The other thing is, we notice that in verse 2 of Joshua 2:2, it said, it was told the king of Jericho, saying, behold, there came men in thither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. Now you think about that. I assume Jericho was a fairly decent sized city. So can you imagine, we'll pick Big Rapids. 2 people pull into Big Rapids. Within a couple hours, the mayor of Big Rapids has been told, hey, there are 2 people from, we'll say, Canada, and we got to find out why they're here. That just right there screams that, hey, these people, they're suspicious. They're watching everybody that comes in, and they're keeping an eye out for invaders, because that's a standard thing you do. You're going to attack a city, you want to find out what everything we can about it. So you're going to be watching for these people. Rahab knew all of this, and knew that all the as you put it, the odds that are stacked against Israel, but knew that God, had faith that God would deliver all of Canaan to Israel. The second part of chapter 9, it says, and your terror has fallen upon us, and the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. That was showing, that was fear. The fear of God and the fear of Israel wasn't enough to save people. The whole land was terrified of Israel, but the only real 2 people that survived, one was because of faith, the other one was because of trickery. The rest of the land, basically perished. One of the things you think about it, somebody says, okay, yeah, I fear God. Okay, you realize according to James, that puts you on the same level as the demons. So that's James 2:19. The next thing is Rahab actually had very little to believe with. She didn't have much information. She didn't have the Bible. Let's see, Moses, was just off the scene, so there wasn't even the first 5 books of the Bible weren't really, if they were available, it was just going to be to the priests probably or something like that in Israel. There just wasn't that much there. Plus, they were just recently written. But what did Rahab have as far as knowledge of God? She had heard, undoubtedly the plagues of Egypt had been passed around, the parting of the Red Sea. But the thing is, those both had happened like over 40 years ago. For the most part, how many of us can remember events, big events from 40 years ago? Stuff like that, kind of fades from our memories pretty quick. But that was 2 of the main things that Rahab had. Also, there was recently the destruction of the kingdoms of Sihon and Og. I've looked them up, and I haven't been able to find a whole lot of information about them, but they constantly bring, in the Bible, they talk about Sihon and Og and the defeat of them. And just by the fact how often they're mentioned, and God gave them the victory, I'm just going to have to assume that they were fairly formidable territories and armies and kingdoms. But also, beyond what had happened to the Israelites, Rahab had nature, had the world around her to see. Like Psalms 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Psalms 50, verse 6 says, the heavens declare his righteousness. With our modern scientific tools, we see further and more detail than ever before into the universe around us. They just recently got like the closest, most detailed picture of the sun, and they're still finding things out. And you keep looking at it, and it's just, if you take a minute to appreciate what you're seeing, it is a magnificent sight. And to contemplate that this was all just spoken into existence. Their theories on how things came into be is the chances of it happening, everything happening just the way it is so minuscule. But your average person in the world, they may see these images, they may see like the deep spacing, things Hubble finds and all these other, the beauties of space, and they go, that's pretty, and that's it. They never ponder on, how it all came to be. They never think about it. In Rahab's case, it could very easily be, she could have, looked up at the stars at night and said, like, where did all this come from? Another point, history is filled with examples of God's divine intervention and working. There are a number, just if you read, like even just read a history of World War II, you can find so many instances where pivotal moments, in the war happened. And there's no real explanation why it happened the way it did. I mean, good case in point. The Germans were trying to develop the atomic bomb, and the British had sent in a special services squad to try and sabotage the factory. And where they were doing it at? Well, they were trying to think, okay, how are we going to get into this building? Come to find out, literally, the back gate was unlocked. So all they had to do was just, open the gate and walk in. They didn't have to fight through a front gate or front door or anything like that. It was just, the back door was open, and they just went in. Battle of Midway. I mean, there's just so much that happened that it's, other than a divine intervention, there is no real explanation. And you can say that, we got lucky. Oh yes, I shared the testimony of this a couple months ago, when I was out visiting my in-laws. My mother-in-law had lost her wedding band that had a half carat and a third carat diamond ring on it. Couldn't find it anywhere. So I was out there and I was working on stuff outside for them. And one of the things I had to do was I had to try and raise their little sunshade on their deck. Well, I'm loosening a nut in a bowl and the nut falls off down to the ground. So I go down to the ground trying to find this nut, looking around. And then my father-in-law, who's going to come, he comes down to help me. He walks out there and he walks out, and this is in the yard, and he stops and looks down, and there's the ring. Was that luck? No. That was divine providence and direction. As William has said, the Lord ordered the day. If I hadn't done everything that I had done that day up to that point, we wouldn't be in the spot where we needed to be. There is an order and design in this world. And if you look at it more and you study it, it can't be denied that there are things that are done on purpose. And there are things that we just don't understand. You go into, there's so much we don't understand and know about the world. For example, we know that, sperm whales, their favorite meal is squid. But do you realize how much they eat of that? They have to eat, of all those whales in the ocean, how much they have to eat, in a given week. And do you realize how many of those squids we've actually ever seen? Is like, you can probably count the number of times on maybe two hands that we've actually got bona fide proof of like the giant squid, which is their main meal. We don't see their main food source. There's just another mystery of this world, another mystery of God. But also, people have a certain way of doing things. I'm sure we've all in our business, Bill, you do maintenance and stuff like that. There's things you do in a certain way. And if somebody were to come by and say, I can tell Bill did that because this is how Bill does his stuff. Or, I'm in computer programming. There are times I can look at a program and say, I know who did that. Because either whether it's good or bad, it's like, okay, everybody's got their own unique fingerprints on how they do things. If the world would admit it, they would see God's fingerprints, his handiwork, his style throughout the whole world. And this is all that Rahab had, was just the tales of the plagues of Egypt, basically what had happened to the Israel up to this point, the world around her. That's all Rahab had to know about God and Israel. The next point is Rahab's faith protected her family. Go down to verse 13. And this is where Rahab is, in essence, negotiating with the spies. It says, we'll start back in verse 12. It says, "Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that will you also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, that you will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death." Rahab's faith in God and that Israel would conquer the land is what protected her family. And in this area, we are a lot like Rahab. Rahab and her family were under a death sentence. In Deuteronomy 20, 16 and 17, when God's given commands to the conquering of Canaan, it says, "But the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth, but thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee." Rahab was kind of a breathing, and everybody in their family, so she was under a death sentence. And so are we. So were we. We were under a death sentence. Rahab was condemned because of who her family was. She was of the family of the Canaanites. We are condemned because we are of the family of Adam. Adam fell and condemned all of us. And there was nothing she could do on her own to save herself or her family. And just like there is nothing that we can do to redeem ourselves. No amount of pleading, no amount of money, no amount of begging is gonna be able to save us. Their only option was trusting in the God of Israel and helping the spies and following their instructions. Just like us. Our only hope is trusting in God and Jesus for the payment of our sins and following the instructions that he has given us for those. There is, as I said, narrow, wide is the path into destruction, but, narrow is the narrow path that leads to salvation. There are certain things that have to be done. You have to realize there's only one way to heaven. You can't get it any other way. But for Rahab, like the spies' instructions, the scarlet thread outside her window, that was to know which one was hers. Because there was more than one house on the wall. To stay inside the house. That was one of the next spy instructions. When the city's falling, you stay in your house. Because, how many of you ever been to a big, festival or, parade, anything with a bunch of people? Everybody's milling around, and in that case, everybody's just there to have fun. That's not in a panic. When a city falls, that's panic. There's chaos. There's no way to know anything what's going on. There's no time for thinking. You see somebody in the street, in something like that. Especially if you're, whether you're a defender or the invader, you have no idea if the person you're seeing in the street is a good or a bad guy, and you don't have time to think, because if you take time to think and try to figure it out or try to find out who they are, you could easily be dead. So the spies are telling you stay in your house, because otherwise, it's the chaos of the city. We won't be able to find you. One of the other spy instructions was not to tell anyone. If Rahab had told others, what would they have done? They would have put, I guarantee everybody in that city wanted to live. They would have done what Rahab was doing. They would have put scarlet threads out their window. Then the spies would have had no idea which house was actually Rahab. And also, the people that would have been doing it, they'd have been doing it just to save their lives, not because they wanted to believe in the God of Israel. They just wanted to stay alive. Next, we'll hop down to Joshua 2:16. Let's see here. And they said, and we'll hop back up to verse 15. It says, "Then she let them down by a cord through the window, for her house was upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon the wall. And she said unto them, Get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned, and afterward you may go your way." Wrong thing. This was showing Rahab's faith that God would protect the spies and they would not be found. Rahab's life depended on the spies surviving and reporting back to Joshua. If they had been caught, Jericho would have still fallen. There would have been no doubt on that. But Rahab's house would not have been saved, because the men who were to carry forth the promise of their protection would never have been delivered. And and it will quite simply, it would have been quite possible, the section of the wall where her house was wouldn't have fallen, and there would have been this red thread hanging out the window. But the soldiers wouldn't have known. Nobody would have known, and it's okay, that's weird that they got a red rope hanging out their window. But Rahab had faith that God would guide and direct the spies to safety. She told them to stay in the mountains until the pursuers had basically given up. And this was no child's game of playing hide and seek, where a kid goes and you try to find them, and you can kind of make them give themselves up if you ask a certain way. You might hear a kid giggling or something like that as they try to hide, or they think they cover their eyes, and since they can't see you, you can no longer see them. This was a game of life and death. And the soldiers, they were searching hard. They weren't just doing some, going around and just casual looking places. They were really searching. The other thing to note about that is back up at Josh on verse 5 is Rahab was telling them that they were here but they left. So she said, pursue after them quickly, for you shall overtake them. The soldiers of Jericho were prepared for this. They were out the door with a band to start searching for them before the gates closed. They said it was toward the nighttime. So within a couple hours, you probably had a sizable contingent of soldiers going out the gates to look for you. How difficult is it to get a group of people organized? If you just went and, okay, we'll just immediately take everybody that's here and we'll go out and we'll start searching. We've not worked together, we've not trained together. It'd be a lot of chaos and a lot of, direction. Everybody have to be explained. It'd take a lot of time. Whereas those that have been in the military, people have trained, for this situation, this is what you do. So there's like, okay, we need to go pursue, we need to go find somebody. Okay, we've trained for this. So they knew exactly what they're doing. So, they were out and going quickly. And Rahab still had the faith that God would protect the spies. Because getting caught would have probably meant torture and death for the spies. And eventually it probably would have been led back to Rahab, which would have cost her life as well. The next one is verse 21. It says, and she said, according to your words, so be it. And she went away and they departed. This was showing Rahab's faith that God would protect the spies in the coming battle. When they left, the spies were the only ones that could save Rahab when the city fell. No, at this point, no one else knew about the help that Rahab had given, and the thing that the terms they negotiated with Rahab. War is an uncertain thing. You don't know, going in if you're going to be the one to survive or not. So Rahab had to have faith that these two men would survive and would come back to her house and be the ones to protect them and deliver them from being killed. The thing is, too, is this was the last time Rahab saw the spies until chapter 6 of Joshua. That was at minimum a couple weeks later. So this whole time, she had no idea, whether or not she was going to hear a knock on her door and open the door and find soldiers there to take her away. She had no idea if the spies survived. She had the faith that God was going to protect them. The second part of verse 21, it says, and she bound the scarlet line in the window. She didn't know when the city was going to be taken, but she wanted to be ready. Granted, in these cases, it's kind of obvious, when the huge army starts attacking your city, but she didn't know when Israel was going to show up. She just knew that they were. But she wanted to have it ready at that point. And she didn't know how Israel was going to attack either. She didn't know whether it was going to be a sneak attack, whether they're going to try to scale the walls. She didn't know anything. But she wanted to have that thread there so that when Israel came and the city fell, she was ready. And I also imagine at that point, Rahab's kept her family close to the house. Somebody said, I need to go to the other side of the city to do whatever business. He's like, no, you stay near the house, because when the fighting starts, you need to be in the house. You need to get to the house immediately. The next verse, verse 23, it says, so the men returned, these are the two spies, after the pursuers had given up. And the two men returned and descended from the mountain and passed over and came to Joshua, the son of Nun, and told him all things that befell them. Rahab had to have faith that the spies' promise would be upheld. There are times that a person's word is not theirs to give. I can't, my boss, I can't just go volunteer him for stuff. Like my kids, they just can't go and volunteer my house for a party. Bill, how would you like to come home and find out that Grace, just without you or Megan knowing, decided I'm gonna have a birthday party with all my friends and neighbors and everything like that. So I mean, there are times, Numbers 30 goes and talks about the making and disallowing of vows. If a husband hears his wife make a vow, the husband can nullify and stop the vow, and God will forgive her because it was not her. She could not. She basically didn't have permission from the person in authority over her to make the vow. Just like if like I couldn't, I can't volunteer my boss for stuff because I didn't have his permission. Now I imagine in this case that the spies had the authority to make this promise, but Rahab didn't know that. She'd had to have faith that the spies' promise would be upheld. Let's see here. Go down to verses, 21 and 22. Rahab's family, they said, everything. Let's see, where am I at in my notes? Okay, chapter 6. That's why I was trying to figure out where I was going with this. Let's go over to Joshua 6, verse 21. And this is after the city has, the walls have fallen, the soldiers have gone in. And it says, verse 21, "They utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep, ass, with the edge of the sword. But Joshua said unto the two men that spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman and all that she hath, as you swear unto her." Rahab's family probably suffered some losses in her salvation because they just couldn't fit everything in the house. But just like us, there are some things that need to be lost when God delivers us. There's some things that, we no longer need. There are habits, there are things in our lives that when we get saved, God says, okay, those need to go. But Rahab's family didn't lose everything. What was in the house was saved, was delivered. Again, like us, when we're saved, there are things that, God says, you can keep that. That doesn't have to go. I'm sure we all have hobbies, things we like to do. And, as long as they are in their proper place and priority, God is okay with that. If there are some people, who knows, who's ever got a hobby? I like computers, and I do a lot of stuff on computers. That's my hobby. So, it's not a wrong thing to have a hobby, but if the computers became, if I was missing church and, spending all my money so I couldn't, give my tithe, and, if computers started to become my God, then my hobby becomes a problem. Another interesting note, compare what happened to Rahab's stuff to Joshua, the next chapter, Joshua 7:1, with Achan. None of Rahab's stuff was cursed, whereas everything that Achan took, the things that Achan took, cursed his entire family. It also, at the end there of Joshua, chapter 6, verse 23, "And the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brethren and all that she had, and they brought out all her kindred and left them without the camp of Israel." And we'll hop down to verse 25. "And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household and all that she had, and she dwelleth in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho." She was separated from Canaan because of her choice. She couldn't go back to her old life. Proverbs 29:27 says, "An unjust man is an abomination to the just, and he that is upright in his way is an abomination to the wicked." Just like us, when we're separated from our old life, there are things, we're saved. There are things that we should be separated from, that we should not go back to. Pastors mentioned often, there are times, when you get saved and you start living for God, you won't have to give up your friends, your old friends. They'll give you up because they don't like your stand. They don't like your change. They don't like the conviction you bring in their life. Well, the proverb says, the upright is an abomination to the wicked. They don't like it. So, and that is Rahab, and you get done 10 minutes early. So let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you, Lord, for the faith and the life of Rahab, Lord. I pray, Lord, that you'll be with the upcoming service, Lord, that you'll just give William the message that we need. In your name, amen.